First, I want to thank the people who came before us, the two speakers, Tyne and Mark. Great presentations. I've been to a lot of these things, and those were two of the best I think I've ever seen. So, a little applause for those folks. What we want to do here this morning is talk about where animal agriculture in general really, is going in the next 10 or 20 years. I think a lot of people think that agriculture is kind of a stuck in the mud behind the times kind of a deal, which can't be further from the truth. It's probably one of the most advanced businesses in the U.S. at least. But that said, all of the inputs are changing. All of the demands that people are expecting are changing. And we need to know more about what those changes are, where those changes are going to lead us. So I've asked three people to join the panel here, three super achievers who really know what they're doing, really know what they're talking about, to kind of give their overview. We'll spend the first 30 minutes or so listening to what they have to say, and then we'll open up for questions afterwards. So if you have questions that pop into your mind while they're talking, go ahead and write them down so you'll remember when it's time to do the Q&A. We're going to start with Danielle Nierenberg. Danielle is a world-renowned researcher, speaker, and advocate on all issues relating to our food system and agriculture. In 2013, she co-founded Food Tank, a nonprofit organization focused on building a global community for safe, healthy, nourished eaters. Food Tank is a global convener, research organization, and non-biased creator of original research impacting the food system. An amazing organization that, like I said, is just 5 years old and has become, I think, an international influence, a really world influencer on food, how we grow it, how we eat it. And with that, let me bring Danielle to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure for me to be here. I want to thank Chuck and the Animal Agricultural Alliance for including my perspective here today. It's not often that I get to meet with a group of such distinguished experts who are doing such interesting things in animal agriculture. So again, I'm Dani Nierenberg. I work for this organization called Food Tank. Our mission is to really highlight stories of hope and success in the food system. You know, what's working in fields and boardrooms and classrooms, kitchens and processing plants and other entities all over the world. I've had this incredible opportunity to travel to 70-plus countries, interviewing hundreds and hundreds of farmers and ranchers, scientists, extension workers, policymakers, women's groups, youth advocacy groups, really the whole range of stakeholders in the food system, and again, collect their thoughts about what's working on the ground. A lot of my interest is focused on small and medium-sized farmers and family farmers, but what Food Tank tries to do is really include all voices. Chuck mentioned that we're an important aspect of our work is convening. And so every year we have food tank summits in different cities. A few months ago we were in Washington, D.C. With a conference focused on cultivating the next generation of agricultural leaders and young people in the food system. We'll be in New York City this fall discussing the issue of food loss and food waste, and then in San Diego to talk about immigrant and veteran farmers in November. So, you know, as a research and advocacy organization, we really try to bring together the whole sort of every side and every face of the food system. We've had Monsanto executives on the same stage as food justice advocates. We've had the CEO of Cargill talking on the same stage as, vegan activists. We really try to bring together as many voices as possible and put people together who normally wouldn't get the chance to talk to one another, which is why I'm really glad to be here today. Chuck asked me to sort of talk about what I'm seeing, what has happened over the last 10, 20 years in animal agriculture. and then talk about, sort of the trends for the future. And so I think, I started my career about 16 years ago, really looking at the growth of industrial animal agriculture in developing countries, and traveled particularly to Asia to look at how animal agriculture was growing and what were the positive and negative aspects of that for communities, looking at processing plants and slaughterhouses as well as farms themselves. And so that's a trend that I think is continuing, right? Industrial animal agriculture is growing all over the world, even in places like sub-Saharan Africa. There are obviously risks involved in that for public health, for communities, for worker safety, for animal welfare. It's a trend that's continuing and needs to be looked at in again, a non-biased way so that workers and the environment and animal welfare, again, can all be protected while also making money for farmers. So I think that's, something that Food Chain will certainly follow it, but there are a lot of different advocacy and research and science organizations who are looking at it as well. I think, the speaker before from Charleston Orwig, pointed out, I don't think 5 or 10 or even 15 years ago, we could anticipate this growth in plant-based alternative meats. I think it's such an interesting time for the meat industry to be on the forefront of that, with companies like Tyson and others investing in plant-based alternatives. I think there's a real opportunity there to be on the cusp of a growing trend, and to have the opportunity to include that in your business portfolios. I don't think, 20 years ago we would be seeing this concern about zoonotic and foodborne diseases. And I think that there's a real opportunity, again, for the meat industry to be at the forefront of preventing those occurrences from happening in the first place, and then also, educating consumers in different ways about how to protect themselves, why these things happen, and how they can be prevented. I think there's a really growing concern in the meat and livestock industry about aging farmers. According to the last agricultural census, the average age of farmers in the United States is 58.3 years old. So there's a real opportunity for farmers and ranchers to begin mentoring that next generation of agricultural leaders and involve them in ways that they can become leaders themselves and learn better business skills, get the mentoring they need to do their jobs well. I think the next Farm Bill has a real opportunity to make sure that young farmers are included. They face a lot of challenges, as you all know. They lack access to land. They lack access to, again, business and mentoring skills. They lack access to credit and health insurance, and they're struggling to pay off student loans. So I think the more that the industry can be on the side of those young and new farmers and really help them get those skills they need, the more the industry can grow. I think that there's also this interesting demand from consumers for transparency in the food system and the story behind their food. Again, 20 years ago, when sort of farmers markets in the United States were becoming more popular, I don't think we would have seen this growing interest in getting to know your farmer, getting to know how your food was grown, asking questions. I think, especially with millennial consumers, they, might not be cooking as much as their predecessors, but they do want that story behind their food and want to know more about it. And I think there's a real opportunity for the meat industry to really take that on and to make sure that they're creating awareness among their consumers about how their products were raised and processed and the story behind them. I think, as the concerns about climate change grow as well, the meat industry has an opportunity to talk about the different methods of livestock production that can either contribute to, mitigate, or even in some cases reverse the impacts of climate change. Again, it's an opportunity to tell a story about what's happening. And you know, I think many farmers and ranchers and meat industry executives haven't always been the best at telling those stories, but again, there's a real opportunity to change the conversation and share those ideas and insights. I'm really excited about a couple of things that I think are on the horizon. One is this idea of big data and artificial intelligence. You see how that can help both small and large farmers alike with being able to access more information about markets or predict weather patterns or figure out, you know, when the next sort of, you know, foodborne illness or zoonotic disease outbreak will occur. There's a real opportunity for the meat industry to be on the forefront of that, and for farmers themselves to be using big data in really creative and interesting ways. And then I think the idea of true cost accounting in the food system is becoming more important. I'm working with the United Nations Environment Program on a project called the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity. It's a terrible, their acronym is really terrible. It's called TEEV Agri-Food, but it's really an assessment of both the positive and negative externalities of how we produce and consume food. And it's being looked at as sort of the IPCC for food. They'll be releasing their report June 5th, which is World Environment Day. And I'll make sure that Chuck has it and any of you who are interested has a link to the report, because it does really assess both big, medium, and small-scale livestock systems, and I think in interesting ways. And I think there will be a lot of surprises from it, including that, you know, I think there's a tendency from people and sort of my side of the debate to think that big is always bad. That's not necessarily the case. I think there are ways that big and small livestock producers alike can use technology in creative ways that they aren't doing right now. I'd like to end on something that's been really important to me as I've started Food Tank and thought more about these issues. I really want more of a discussion on combining both high and low technologies, learning from traditional methods and also combining them with the latest innovations in technology. That's not something that's discussed enough. I think there's a tendency to look at these issues as very black and white rather than gray. So I'm hoping that, you know, you all, and as you continue your discussions over the next few days, can think about ways to learn from, you know, traditional and indigenous technologies and innovations and combine them with some of the groundbreaking work that you're doing on your own operations and on your own farms. Thank you again for this opportunity. It's really a delight to be here, and I'll look forward to hearing the discussion.
Next up is a woman I've known for way too long, I think, an incredibly long time. I was thinking about that the other day, and I thought, I'm not that old. She must have started with the AMI when she was 12, maybe. Anyway, it's Janet Riley, also known as the Queen of Ween. She's been with the AMI since when did you start? 91. Wow. Janet serves as the North American Meat Institute's Senior Vice President of Public Affairs. She develops public information and issue management strategies, manages press relations and drafts speeches, news releases, and other public communications, and oversees the Institute's news reporting on meatinstitute.org. She also serves as the Queen of Ween. You can ask her about that during the questions sessions, not right now, by the way. And she was the founder of the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council. She has a lot of interesting things to say, some great slides that I saw earlier this morning. So, Janet, come on up.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. So I get to go and Dallas follow. So Dallas promised to correct me if I get anything wrong. So today I have to look into the crystal ball and try to figure out, what I see coming down the road based on the 27 years I've spent here. But I think that more important than what's coming down the road is how we're going to shape what's coming down the road and how we're going to engage to have an impact on it. And when I look back at 27 years in this industry, I just look at some of the changes we've seen, whether it's in communications or how the meat industry runs its businesses. For those of you here who have a communications role, you'll remember the days of mailing our press releases. And back in '91, we were pretty excited to get a fax machine at the Meat Institute. And then I think about how we communicate today and the many mediums that we use. We don't always get things right, but I can tell you that one time when we got it very right is an example of jumping on a trend. And back in 1991, there was this kind of upstart professor, and nobody knew what to make of her, and it was Temple Grandin. And we started listening to her and dialoguing with her, and back in '96, it became clear to me that she really thought we could measure animal welfare objectively and use data and not make it a subjective evaluation. And so I proposed internally that maybe we should talk to Temple about an audit. And I'd love to tell you that everybody jumped up and cheered and said, great idea. That wasn't exactly what happened. There were a few people that said, seriously, you think this industry is going to count moose? And the new kid with no animal agriculture background said, yeah, I do. And that was one good move we made, because I think the audits were going to happen, whether we did them or not. But by getting on early, by becoming an early adopter, we were able to shape the outcome. And I think it's been really good for the industry. So I'm very proud of that. And we have to look for more opportunities like that along the way. So a couple things that come to mind. Customer distance from animal agriculture. Whoops. There was supposed to be, there we go. That's just one of those charts you've seen a million times about people living on farms, and there are going to be you're going to hear fewer references to grandpa's farms, because now it's going to be great-grandpa's farms and great-great-grandpa's farms. People who are coming up now have less exposure to farms. Nothing earth-shattering in that. But the problem is they're going to have less ability to discern fact from fiction because they won't have the exposure. So they're going to become more subject to influence and some of the misinformation that's been so widely talked about on social media and the like. And so if you've ever heard of the site Snopes, where people go to bust myths, I decided to take a look at Snopes and see some of the myths they were busting on animal agriculture. And I had never seen this one. But I'm having trouble with this clicker, sorry. Wait, let me go back. That is an image that's circulating on Facebook about how pigs are housed in the United States. I don't quite understand what that is, but apparently it was taken in China. But if you've never seen how pigs are housed, you might start to think, wow, that's really concerning. And many of you may have seen this picture of this chicken. Well, this happens to be a legitimate breed of chicken, not one that we popularly raise in the United States, but it was taken in another country, but to the consumer, well, that must be those hormones, or that must be GMOs, but that's called a Brahma chicken. So consumers are going to be very influenced by things like this if they haven't had the opportunity to learn. Consumers aren't ignorant, they aren't stupid. They have not had the opportunity to learn, and it's our job to teach them. As all of this is happening, there's media coverage that's constantly bombarding them. And is Phil Brasher in the room by any chance? Because I think of Phil Brasher as one of those folks who was the classic journalist who I've worked with since the beginning. He used to sit at USDA, at the Associated Press, and he was your classic ag reporter. And that's changed. Today we don't have those kinds of reporters, and a lot of the ag or food reporting is coming out of different sorts of publications like Quartz and BuzzFeed and Vox. So we're getting different kinds of reporting. And to be honest, it tends to be much more critical of animal agriculture. And that leads me to conclude that we can't rely on the news reporting as a means of informing our customers. We need to be connecting directly with those customers and consumers so that we can do the educating directly. Another issue I see is the curriculum in the schools. My kids have gone to school in Montgomery County, Maryland, and every 6th grader in Montgomery County, Maryland goes to environmental education for a week. It's a trip they look forward to. I think it's a great idea. But we don't have any equivalent on food, on agriculture. Wouldn't it be great if every kid had to go to a farm? Every kid had to be exposed to where their food comes from. But we're not doing that. Instead, our kids are getting Food Inc., Forks Over Knives, What the Health, Cowspiracy. That's what's being shown in the classrooms. And so I looked, and this is Mrs. Claver's classroom. That was one of many examples I found on the internet. And so Mrs. Claver asked them to watch Food Inc. and then write a letter to their lawmaker about how to reform the food system. I also found this is a sharing site, so all these teachers are sharing their curriculum and they can buy from each other. For like $1, you can buy my lesson plan for Food Inc. And I know a lot about Food Inc. because often they're told to write a letter to somebody, and I tend to be one of the people who gets some of these letters from kids who are outraged, and then I have to write back to them. And it's really, I have no trouble with somebody seeing these films as long as maybe they could see something else that would give them a little bit more information, because it's really impacting how they're seeing things. So Luke, let me tell you about Luke. I'm a Boy Scout leader. And just a couple weeks ago, I was on a camp out, and Luke, who I've known very well, and traveled Philmont together, and I've seen him enthusiastically consume meat, asked me for a clean fry pan to cook his tofu. And I said, Luke, what are you doing? We're having short ribs for dinner. And he said, well, Mrs. Riley, I saw a movie yesterday in school, and I am never eating a processed food again. And I said, what was the movie? I don't know. Who made the movie? I don't know. I just know that processed foods are bad. And I said, Luke, do you know that tofu doesn't grow on trees? Do you understand it's processed from soybeans? That's a very processed food. But anyway, Luke was determined that he's now a vegetarian. But I'm going to bank that at the May camp out, he's forgotten all about that film. We can only hope. But we can't take it for granted. We need to be reaching kids with a different perspective. I want to tell you about some focus groups we did that were very instructive. And they told me a lot about how people are thinking now. We did back-to-back focus groups with boomers and millennials, 3 cities. So we talked to the boomers, we talked to the millennials. And in this case, we were talking about processed meat to understand what they're thinking, where they're coming from. Now, one group was really outspoken and passionate, and one group was really quiet. How many people think the boomers were really outspoken and passionate more than the millennials? Raise your hand. How many people think the millennials were really outspoken? Wrong. It was the boomers. It was striking to me. The boomers felt so passionately about these products. They had been raised on brands. They were singing the bologna song. They were adamant about, what was the best product, and remember those days, and remember that commercial. And we even asked, the moderator said, what would you do if there were no bacon anymore? What would you eat for breakfast? And this one boomer said, oh, we would find the bacon. I mean, it was just like adamant, And the millennials, I thought the millennials were going to be really outspoken. They were almost silent. They were great turn takers. You called on them. They were very reserved. They wanted information. But what was clear to me is they didn't have that same level of emotional connection. They weren't singing jingles. They weren't talking about brands. They did not have that connection. And so that just tells me that the millennials are coming up, and they're going to be our next consumers, our next primary shoppers as the boomers. I'm the last year of the boomers as we ride off into retirement. And more. And so we need to make that connection with boomers, with millennials in ways that are meaningful to them. We're also going to have more competition from products. And we've talked a lot about the Impossible Burger and Beyond Beef already. But I still believe that we are going to have the taste advantage. I've tasted the products, and with all due respect, I think if you're probably already a vegetarian, maybe these are appealing to you. As an enthusiastic carnivore, I still feel like there's a ways to go. Meat's going to trump it big time. I haven't had the opportunity to taste the lab-grown meat, so I can't speak to that. But this isn't completely new. I mean, this is a new extension of other products that are out there that have filled a niche market. So I can't tell you where it's going to go, but I'm going to bank on taste. The other trend that I think is going to continue to impact us going further is that Twitter that we've come to know so well. Many days at about 6 a.m. It's often what CNN leads with at 7 a.m., what's happening on Twitter. And because now Twitter does allow more characters than it used to, but still, it's a very short medium of communication, and I think it may be destroying a bit of our critical thinking because everything has to get oversimplified and boiled down. One more trend I see that I'm actually encouraged by is I think science is starting to come full circle. For a while, I remember growing up in the 70s, and my mother wouldn't let my father have an egg because he was going to die. And so we had egg beaters, and now cholesterol is no longer a concern, and eggs are the perfect food. Sodium, we're starting to see the Institute of Medicine say, maybe too little sodium could pose a risk, and there seems to be not quite the same level of shift as we saw with cholesterol, but we're seeing science emerge on sodium, and that's really good. On meat, this was wonderful to see, but the Minnesota coronary experiment, I don't know if you know this one, but there was a study done back in the 60s out of Minnesota. It was a great study because they were able to study people where they could control their diets because they were in mental institutions in Minnesota, and so they were able to actually control. And so the finding was that saturated fat was not correlated with coronary heart disease, but that was not what the researcher had hypothesized. So what did he do? He put the records in his basement, and he never let them come to light. Then his son, finds the records. He's also a researcher, and takes them to the National Institutes of Health, and they reanalyze the data and find out that the actual research on which the war on fat was based actually shows something quite opposite. So I think it's great that this has come to light, and I hope that we're going to see more and more good nutrition research come to light, more and more critical thinking about science. The good news is that I think demand is going to continue to grow globally. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that with the growing population, so we've got that going in our favor. But we've got to control our destiny. And we just launched something new that I'm excited about called the Meat Institute Social Sharing Circle, because we need to be sharing information more readily. It can't just come from the associations. We need to have authentic communications with people directly. People trust people they know. And so what we're able to do is share information with people who sign up on our Social Toaster site, which, by the way, gratuitous plug, meet.socialtoaster.com. You can sign up for free and receive information that's pre-formatted. If you want to share it or edit it or whatever you want to do, it's all done for you. So we're putting the facts together just to make it easier for people to share this and get a really good multiplier effect going out there. But we need to be communicating the facts and connecting with people in real and meaningful ways. The growing demand for transparency. We've heard a lot about that already. Absolutely so true. We need to show people how we handle livestock. In my case, it's pretty tricky because I represent the packing plants, and that's a hard thing to show and make it look picture perfect, like a beautiful ranch. And so we decided, though, we were just going to do it. And we worked with Temple Grandin, and we created the Glass Walls series of videos. We decided to call Paul McCartney's bluff. If slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be a vegetarian. Well, we didn't think that was true, so we created videos with Temple speaking in an unscripted way. Of course, Temple Grandin's never scripted. That was funny, yeah. By the way, a little sidebar, her students just hosted an event in Colorado State. They were so proud of it. It was called Temple Grandin Unfiltered. And I replied, I said, when is she filtered? So anyway, Temple spoke in her own way, because when I asked her, would you mind narrating this? She said, Janet, I will narrate this, but I will not be scripted. So that was the deal. So she uses her own words, and that's what people want. They want that authentic communication. So Glass Walls is a great start, but it's only a start. We need to do more of that. We need real people, and we need direct dialogue. Little anecdote, but we don't know why, but people call us every day, multiple times a day, to ask us if a hot dog is a sandwich. And my phone rings like crazy. I can usually tell, and it's usually a group, a classroom. I think it's a fraternity house. It's a group of people calling me. I answer the phone. Sometimes I know it's them, and I might answer in a funny way, like Queen of Ween, Hot Dog Hotline, and they laugh. And they say, oh my God, you exist. You're really there. Yeah, I'm here. And I'll say, wait, I have ESP. A hot dog is not a sandwich. And they say, how did you know I was going to ask that? And I say, I don't know, I'm just really smart. But they really, they want to have that conversation. And they're just thrilled that we answer the phone. Sometimes it's a real pain in the butt because they will call at 10 o'clock at night, perhaps a little beer-induced. And there's usually a bet riding. I can hear people screaming, and sometimes we talk about whether you can put ketchup on a hot dog. And I know it might sound trivial, but I think just that connection with somebody, talking to somebody like that, being a little self-effacing, not taking yourself too seriously. Like, I remember I was talking to Chuck about our decision to go on the Daily Show. We were really scared when we did that, but we've never seen more reaction to anything than when we stopped taking ourselves so seriously and went on the Daily Show and responded and talked to and debated Neil Barnard. If you've never seen it, it was pretty fun. And so we're going to have to do more of that. Less formal, fancy, polished communication and real on-the-ground, having dialogues with people in real ways. And I'm going to wrap up here, but I think this is the final trend I've got, is there is a growing demand for choices. People want to be in control. They want permission to enjoy the products that we produce, and the best way to give them permission is by providing products that meet their needs, their preferences, their social values. We just embarked on a huge project where we actually cataloged all of the different products that are out there with the claims they make. If you're in the room and we've missed your product, let us know because we can add it. It was a huge project, but you go by product like ham, hot dogs, roast beef, and you can drill down and see low sodium, reduced sodium, natural, American Heart Association certified, whatever it is, because we want to put the consumer in charge. That's what they want now. They want you to take their needs into consideration, and that's only going to grow as the millennial population ages. And I think so this is my last slide. Our goal is to serve our products to consumers, and we want them to feel good. The problem is that sometimes there's a little garbage in between us. And we're going to have to continue to kind of empty that trash can by having real, authentic dialogues and by responding and influencing the trends as we see them and not waiting until the trends have fully matured. And there's my email. Thank you.
Okay, last but certainly not least, hey, Dallas, wake up over there. Okay. He's Vice President of Industry Relations for the National Pork Producers Council. He's responsible for enhancing relationships with industry sectors. Dallas has more than 25 years of experience in agricultural marketing and an extensive background in the area of sales, sales management, product management, brand management, business startups, and event marketing. In other words, he's a very busy man. I'm glad he could have a few minutes to come talk with us. Dallas, come on and tell us what you think.
Thank you. I was wondering, this is almost like Ellen up here with these white chairs. And so, try to catch up here real quickly, but this is exciting times in which we're working in. I've been engaged in the agricultural sector for a number of years. And as the new students coming in, I think it's a great time to be engaged in agriculture. But I will say this, if you're somewhat uncomfortable with change, you're going to be very uncomfortable in the next few years. There's no doubt about that as it relates to that. The whole host here of discussion that we have, and Cliff, for those of us that's been around a long time coming here, we talk a lot about what we're against. In fact, the majority of our time is spent what we're against. And what you hear, this dialogue that's coming more and more, and then the two previous speakers talk about, we have to spend more time talking about what we're for. Because there are a lot of shared values in this process. And I think it does start from here going forward with the opportunity to do a better job of sharing values. You know, agriculture in general, and I heard this morning the term already used, we love to use it, proactive. The stark reality for most of agriculture, the way we define proactive is reacting faster. The truth about being proactive is the fact you have to do something prior to it being obvious that you have to do it. And that's becoming more the challenge for us. I'm going to spend a little time just kind of giving you some viewpoints of more importantly, I know we like to talk about consumers a lot, but the reality of the equation, there's a lot of marketplace turbulence taking place out there. It's a tough world in the food business, both in the retail and the food service side. And so there is a, fight for a share of stomach. You heard about choice. And so in most of these boardrooms, and I have the opportunity to spend about 50% of my time in the C-suite with our key food and companies and shareholder meetings. And they're worried about next quarter's earnings. So this idea of turbulence and how you differentiate from competition, I think we need to spend more time in these three sectors that you see here, really about these key brands, these CPGs, the channels in which they're delivered, which may be retail or food service, and the policymakers are ultimately going to be those that have the long-term impact of the key changes that we see happening. For some reason, I think, there we go. The idea being, and you've heard this before, this love affair that is re-emerging with farmers and ranchers, the problem is they don't like how we do it. And so you have to keep that in mind. We're always about putting a face on farming. We've done a great job of raising our voice, but a poor job of, talking, or we've done a great job of raising our products, but a poor job of raising our voice. But it's the need there to understand that modern technology and the application is the real challenge in place. And this idea of this convergence of products, if you heard this morning about cereal and different stuff, is that in the past we never talked about in the meat industry that we ever want to associate this with a live animal when you're shopping or whatever. But that's merging together. So these product attributes, whether it's in regards to the treatment of the animal, the ingredients, the processes and how it's done, all are more important. And that gets to that idea of what we call food transparency, and how we talk about that. I want to say, first of all, I just come back from 2 days. I didn't get here till late last night. We had a meeting with the 25 of the top retailers in the country, talking to them about what's going on in our industry, and I just want to call out, Publix is here in the room in the back of it. Had the opportunity to meet the gentleman back there. I really want to thank them. You should thank them for the fact that they're here today. On their own to engage and better understand how food is produced. But it is our job to go there. It's not, and that's going to be part of our part. I speak a lot to other commodity groups about our efforts and what we're doing and our outreach efforts that we've been engaged in that I lead for a number of years now, about going into their boardrooms and talking to them, because it is our job to tell them what we do. Their job may be to sell it, but we have a responsibility there to work on that. It's not a simple solution. There's a discovery that's going on in all of this. Production practices, where it be animal welfare or whatever, this whole movement in sustainability, but more importantly, this supply chain management process. And most importantly for the companies, this brand reputation. There's a term we refer to all the time called brand hypocrisy. We see it played out nightly in the news in relationship to our elected officials, our church leaders, to you name it, that may say one thing and then ultimately do something else. The same occurs in the food business, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we're educating our customers of these things that are happening so that they don't get played out, into the brand reputation game. Challenge for us, the real looking forward, I think, for us, is this intersection we're at about the application of technology and then ultimately the sustainability of what that means. Sustainability is no longer a buzzword. It's alive and well, I'm telling you. And all the major companies are very interested in it. We have certain, Land O'Lakes, for all practical purposes, has a profit center surrounding sustainability. But it's very important to the financial institutions, those that invest, the venture capital groups and that invest in these companies. What are they doing to give back to the planet and make sure that, and what we're discovering in many cases, these sustainability initiatives actually save us money. The whole point I'm telling you is efficiency can no longer be the sole driver in agriculture. Some things we have to look at in the fact that says sometimes we have to do some things that necessarily don't always save us money. And so I just say that this whole idea of smart technology, and there's no question, both in the row crops and the animal livestock today, the application of technology is growing at light speed, and we're discovering all kind of things. But that also distances us from the kind of the emotion side of this whole deal. And this proof element, and I have this little formula that we use a lot called principle, practices, proof generates trust. First of all, the idea being is it's driven off a set of ethical principles. We do the things we do because it's the right thing to do. But we also have to have a common set of practices which we're measured against. But at the end of the day, they say they like that, but you better deliver on some proof that you're actually doing it. And so we have, as we talked about, audits and that kind of thing that's coming into play. I'm just here to tell you that proof is coming at a rapid rate, that more and more of our customers are looking to us to get some type of assurance, whatever that means, that we're doing what it is that we say we're doing. So the idea here of what I call relevance and credibility going forward, everyone has one of these in their hand, pocket. I'm sure most of you are probably looking at it right now because I'm talking. But the point of this I'm getting at, between science and emotion, none of you really care what makes this work. The technology that creates this thing to be a computer. What you care about is all the apps that are on the front side of it. And that's a little bit of where we're at, is this intersection of technology and emotion, of how we can do this, but at the same time we bring it out. So my recommendations to you in this thing is pretty simple as we go forward and look what we're after. With the application of all this technology, we still have to humanize as much as possible, that we too care in these farming practices and ranching and so forth about this process. But we have to continue to focus on innovation. You know, we have to highlight these new methods and talk about them. Be proud of them, engage them. But at the same time, we have to understand the sustainability initiative, the environmental impact. All of this has never been more important now. And I know most producers, farmers, ranchers say it's a bunch of fluff because they've heard it for so long. But we're discovering ways in which to measure this. And, you know, I use this little manifesto that kind of gets to this long term, that we have to be, as you heard from our first speakers, all types of operations, that regardless of size, and that we can all work towards these, to where we're protecting food safety, in our case for animal welfare and environment, but they are sustainable, and most importantly, the need for protein to feed the world's growing population. So that kind of summarizes, I would say, one of the things that I've been talking about, and more of that we talk, the need to tell our story, is the idea of the society that we're in, which is no longer the word of mouth, but what I call the word of the mouse. And the fact that where most people go to get information, you know, is not necessarily engagement, you know, in this process. So that's one of the things I'm encouraged by, to see, you know, more and more of our area of sharing our stories and talking about this subject. But again, very excited about the opportunity going forward and the application of technology. And with that, Chuck, I'll shut up and give it back to you.
Those are three great presentations, and I'm assuming there are a lot of questions out there. So let's go to questions now. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Raise your hand, like this. Well, let me start with a question. One of the things we've talked about all day is the rise of imitation meat products. I don't know what you would like to call them, but they've definitely become a bigger and more important part of the American diet, and they probably will grow. So, aimed at all three of you, what's going on there? Why is that becoming that kind of a marketing influence? Danielle, can you?
I mean, I think there's a growing demand for it. I think, you know, with the rise of more vegetarian and vegan eaters, or people who at least want to do that 1 or 2 days a week, that they want tasty alternatives. And again, they want products that they can believe in, and some of those brands are really good at telling a story and marketing in a way that is compelling to consumers, and so that they want to eat those things, or at least try them. They don't always stick with them, for over the long term, but I think it's very interesting. I don't think those alternatives are a problem for you all in the meat industry. Again, I think they can be an opportunity. But I think there is that growing demand, and people want more of the sort of the story behind their food.
Janet, big change in the animal ag business because of this?
I'm not sure. I mean, vegetarianism has, the number of Americans who are true vegetarians hasn't really changed over time. What has changed is people being open to other foods, and I think people have become more adventurous eaters. We now have such a variety of foods and different ethnicities, and I think these products may become more mainstream as people are more adventurous.
Can you say that again? For some reason,
Oh, okay, sure.
while you're talking, I'll make
Sure.
Now it's on.
Wait, what?
Now you're on, apparently.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll go back. What I said was vegetarianism, according to what I've seen, hasn't changed. The percent of the population that's a true vegetarian hasn't changed for the last couple of decades. But what has changed is people being open to trying foods that don't contain an animal protein, vegetarian options. And so, but I think that parallels with us all becoming consumers of more diverse foods and different ethnic foods and the like. And so choices are a fine thing. And I don't think that the industry is feeling necessarily threatened in a way, as some stories have characterized it. I think everybody just wants things to be labeled accurately and properly reflect, what's in them. So I think time will tell. But again, there's a taste hurdle that's going to have to be overcome for the meat eater who is viewing these as a substitute.
Dallas, we've got artificial meat coming along. Are we going to have to start breeding artificial pigs to supply the? That was.
Well, I think there's two categories here. One is plant-based proteins, and then you have the cultured meat sector side, which are kind of uniquely two different products. As discussed, plant-based have been around for a long time. We have to look at it. The application of technology is occurring there as well. I mean, I grew up with Morton TV dinners, which tasted terrible. Today, you can go to Publix frozen food section and get a frozen dinner that tastes like it was just prepared, at your table. So the same, I think, is applying to the plant-based proteins. The technology is allowing them to get better. Well, about choice, the thing that we're point being is why do you think they should be called meat? I mean, if they want to do that, let them do that. I mean, it's a plant-based alternative protein. That's what they can call it whatever they want. There's three categories. There's meat, then there's the sector of whatever, beef, pork, whatever, chicken, and then there's a category of burgers, steaks, whatever. We've lost that category on the bottom side. We also think they should be qualified, to be the same inspection as what meat is, through whether it be FSIS or government agency, to assure that these are all safe and healthy for that. So, as Janet said, we're not as concerned about it from one. We should take the charge that says, look, if you're producing a product that can't compete with a plant-based protein taste-wise, then we're in trouble. Okay. But it's an alternative, but we should be very much aware of it. The other part I will say, it's yet to be untold on some of this stuff, but some of the products that really make this tasteful it really comes into question where those are sustainable long-term and they're scalable. That is, if they're going to ramp them up and to be big enough, what impact is that going to have, like, for example, on coconut oil? So we'll see how it does, but we shouldn't be surprised. The application of technology is making these products more, and we have companies who are looking at it from this aspect of garnishing more market share. As I said, it's a tough market out there. We just want to make sure that, one, it's truthful in what they're saying, two, they're transparent in whatever it is. We have a hard time with the idea in the cultured meat, when people are so concerned about natural, organic, all of this stuff, and then this juxtaposition of your eating this cultured product. I mean, but that's the new world in which we live.
Yeah.
Can I follow up on what he said? Because
Sure.
Similarly, it's interesting that people are talking about clean labels and simple labels and the like.
You'll have to go,
Mike.
sorry, they have you lost.
Okay.
There you.
It's probably, okay. So people are talking about clean labels and simple labels and fewer ingredients.
And moving away from processed, and yet if you take a burger. Microphone. Okay.
Lift your mic up closer.
Here? No. Interesting. Okay. All right.
Stay.
All right, you get one. I'm just going to stand here. You have one ingredient in 85% lean ground beef, but then if you look at a competing plant-based protein product, one that I looked at had 22 ingredients. So, I think it's interesting. I feel like there's a little bit of a double standard for something that's a processed meat product versus anything else that's processed, just like my story about Luke and the tofu, Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah.
I'll just stay here.
Yeah,
Okay.
good idea. Yeah, just as a point on that, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association has petitioned the government to be a little bit more truthful in labeling about these products. In fact, the French government just a couple of days ago said, no, you can't do it. If it's not a meat product from a meat animal, you can't call it meat. So with that, I think there's a question way over there.
Hi. Carlos Saviani from the WWF, World Wildlife Fund. I have a question for Dallas. Dallas, thank you for the brilliant presentation. And you brought up something that I think, we are not paying attention, which is the pressure from the investors and from the finance sector. We work with 3 very large retailers that recently made commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emission gases. And we asked them why you were making those commitments, and is it because the consumers, and they said, yes, we have been researching consumers. They are, the millennials are getting more concerned about, the environment. They have been, asking us to move in that direction, but we are really moving in this direction, making these huge commitments is because the pressure we are getting from investors, from the stockholders, pension funds, and the people that are investing in those companies. And I'm glad to hear, Dallas, that it's something that you find important. So could you elaborate more on that? And could you please, tell us where you see this going and what is the level of understanding that those investors have of agriculture, and where do you think, that pressure is going to drive us to?
Carlos, I'm glad you spoke up. I almost used your name a while ago in the audience. So, one of the efforts that we have is a shareholder outreach where we actually invest in many of the food companies and go to the shareholder meetings. One sector of that is the financial districts, whether that be Morgan Stanley, BlackRock, variety of those. And in this new world, they're very interested in their brand exposure, risk management for these companies, as it relates to where their ratings on those organizations are. And so, and we have some of our activist friends who also have learned this, and so they're in there visiting with us. And you think about these individuals that are in the financial district or that, they're like many of they grew up, they don't know anything about the farms, they're looking at all this stuff. And to date, the activist has been much more aggressive at being in there, talking to them about this stuff. And they're also implementing audits, things of that nature that's measuring it on benchmarking scales. They're very concerning to us because, and I get sometimes a little sensitive to the fact that we always talk about consumers. They say, well, and then people ask me like, well, okay, if you're going to a truck stop and there's a Subway there, I'm not for sure that most of the truck drivers that are eating Subway sandwiches really are caring about some of these issues and related to antibiotics or whatever. I use that generally. But it's much more the pressure you're receiving on shareholders than the consumers walking in the door on many of these subjects. And we are very concerned about this from a new tactic from the financial investment district and the ratings and that's occurring. And keep in mind on these multinational national companies, especially, whether they be Nestle's or Walmart's or Ahol's or that also have a European influence to them, that's carrying over into that. And so Boyer Capital, there's lots of these that's going on, that's looking at this, that's already making that investment change, in the European Union, for example, and then they're bringing over here to us. So it is something that we all should be very concerned about and look at. If you haven't, you should, because we're playing catch-up in the fact that we're in there now visiting with those financial institutions and talking to them about the commitment to the industries, the agriculture sectors, environmental, and in many cases doing it combined with our friends, whether that be World Wildlife Fund, Nature Conservatory. And I tell you all of this in the fact that agriculture sector has got to do a better job of working with friendly NGOs. Because they are waking up to the fact that in order to feed the world in that, we have to work together. And yes, there are some that are out there that are continuing to put us out of business, but there are also in this new world of how we think about some of these new technologies of the potential impact that's going to have on climate and so forth. So anyway, long answer to a long, short question.
The NGO thing, I want to pop that over to Danielle. She's done more work, I think, with NGOs than anybody else around here. Do we need to work more closely with those?
Absolutely. I think if you're not recognizing the NGO community, then you're doing yourself a disservice in the same way that the NGO community has to start working with business more, and that's something that Food Tank has tried to do. We're not always going to agree. I don't agree with a lot of things that have been said here today, but I think the conversation needs to continue happening. The dialogue needs to be happening. We need to break down these silos. We're all sort of in it for the same reasons, and we have different ways of getting there, but we do need to be talking, and that's honestly, why I come to conferences like this one, no matter, it's not always the friendliest rooms for me, but I think the dialogue definitely needs to happen.
Okay, that's all the time we have. I'd love to continue it for another hour, but these people have given great information, great presentation, so let's give them an applause.